Thank you. Thanks, Richard and Nigel and all the team at Hotel Divan for coming along this morning. And I know it's early for you guys, 9:30, but for learning all about Crowded House Sauvignon Blanc. It's a huge pleasure to be here to be able to show you guys through the wine, but also because it's International Sauvignon Blanc Day. So we should all have a quick cheers to that. Cheers. Fantastic. And also the first time being or hosting a Crowded House tasting for the team in the UK as well. So just before I share my screen too, with you guys to take you through it, I know from my time living in London that my accent can be maybe a little bit hard to understand, sound a little bit funny at times. So if I'm speaking too quickly or there's something that you're not getting or not understanding, please feel free to just jump in and ask questions. Definitely no bad interruptions, that's for sure. So let's kick into it. Sorry, I'm just finding the presentation here.
We do everything quite slowly in New Zealand, don't we, Matt?
Yeah, we do. We do actually. The wheel turns quite slowly around here, so yeah, just bear with me on this one. Right. You guys got it? You can see it?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay. 1 second.
Do you want me to have a crack, Matt?
Yeah, that might be great. Thanks, Maddie.
Matt, why don't you tell us a bit of... here we go. That was quick. That's why we have Maddie.
Perfect.
All right.
Excellent. So back to the start slide, please, Maddie. Thank you. Doing this from Australia. So for me, this picture really does set the scene for Crowded House perfectly. Having grown up in Marlborough personally, I remember it as being bare land, predominantly sheep farming, and it's been really exciting over the last sort of 30 years or so to watch the evolution of Marlborough and how much it's grown into this lush green landscape of vines everywhere, with a number of growers and producers who are all passionate about Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and as passionate about Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc as I am. So firstly, where is Marlborough in New Zealand? Next slide, please, Maddie. Sorry about this. We're at the top of the South Island on the east coast. So it's a cool climate region that is made up really of 3 sub-regions. And the sub-regions are not particularly something that people or many people seem to talk about, but they all have their own unique nuances that really help to produce the classic style of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc that we all know and love. So we'll start with the Wairau Valley. So the soils are old riverbed, and they're very stony, very alluvial, very free draining. It's often the earliest part of the valley to be picked as well, or to ripen, and produces more of those sort of tropical characters, citrus as well, and orange blossom, some of those beautiful sort of flower characters that you get in there with the wines too. Then we move south into the southern valleys. You can say on that, Maddie, it's okay. Previous one. Then we move south into the southern valleys, And the soils of the Southern Valleys are glacial outwash soils. So they have a high percentage of clay and wind blown loess as well. And the wines from the Southern Valleys do tend to be a bit more complex with more palate weight, texture, sort of alpine herb notes and citrus line behind the wine as well. Then we move further south again into the Awatere Valley, which is distinct again in its own right, and its climate and soil type, and also the wine personality as well. But for Crowded House, we take fruit predominantly from the Wairau Valley, with a small amount coming from the Southern Valley as well, or the Waihopai Valley, where our estate is in the Southern Valleys as well. So there's a lot of smaller valleys within these sub-regions, and there's a lot of vineyards as well that produce, that bring about a lot more complexity, and you'll see that over the next few slides too. So we have several growers throughout both the Wairau and the Southern Valleys, some of which have been with us for at least 10 years or longer. And it's those long-term relationships that we have that with those vineyards that help us to produce a consistent wine year on year. Now, we're not necessarily emphasizing any one vineyard in particular. It really is about producing the best expression of Marlborough Sauvignon every season. So it varies slightly year on year from which vineyards and percentages and how much. But I'll be speaking specifically to the 2021 Crowded House that we're tasting today. So in conjunction with the sub-regions is Marlborough's incredible cool climate. So we have a prevailing easterly weather pattern that comes through. So if you're looking at you can see the picture there, so where the Pacific Ocean is, that's that easterly. So it comes off the coast, naturally cools down the valley itself. And it's the easterly pattern that gives us these beautiful warm days and then these really cool nights. So Marlborough, we have quite a wide diurnal temperature range, so a lot of highs and lows. So through spring and into autumn, through spring we do get, ground frost, so it can get down to 0 or below 0, but can be anywhere from sort of 5 to 10 degrees minimum, and then up to 20 to 25 degrees during the day as well. And so those warm temperatures during the day help to bring about, beautiful ripe flavors, get that concentration in the fruit. And then it's those cool nights that really help to retain that hallmark acidity of Marlborough and defines and gives length and finesse to the wines as well. As a part of that, we also have quite low rainfall. So our annual rainfall is around about 650 to, let's say, 700 millimeters a year. So if you wanted to look in that of context, you'd be looking at Loire or Burgundy, let's say. So of course, Loire, there's quite a bit of Sauvignon there. Burgundy being more Chardonnay and Pinot, but it's really that low rainfall that helps us to keep disease pressure low. And looking at the map as well, you can see the mountain ranges just to the northwest of the Wairau Valley. And it's those mountain ranges there that really stop a lot of that really wet, heavy wet weather that comes through from the northwest. Most of the rainfall gets dumped on the other side of that. And so we still get a small amount, but it's nowhere near as much as what the West Coast does. So those ranges really help to protect us from that weather coming from the northwest. Then to the southeast, where you've got the Southern Valleys and the Awatere Valley, you can see the range that runs through there as well. And that really helps to stop a lot of that really cold weather that sort of comes from the Arctic, pops up and actually blocks a lot of that cooler weather as well. So we end up with this fantastic climate. I'm sure as Richard alluded to earlier, probably rather be in Marlborough at the moment when we're still having, mid days in the mid-20s, blue skies. It's a fantastic spot to be. So it's the perfect balance of conditions for for growing Sauvignon Blanc, and in particular Crowded House and the style that we're looking to achieve. Maddie, can you just jump back to the previous slide, please? So what makes Crowded House unique within the subregions? So now we'll go into a little bit more detail here. So we're in the Wairau Valley at the moment now, and as I mentioned before, that a lot of the soil profile is those very stony alluvial soils. The closer we move towards the coast and where Blenheim is, and then as we get further east, the soils become quite heavy and quite poorly drained as well. So we have a couple of growers there covering about 7 hectares, and there's no irrigation for the vineyards, so essentially dry farmed, but it's a really high water table. So the vines have an absolute abundance of water that they can tap into. And with that, we get really vigorous canopy growth, so a lot of vegetative growth throughout the season. So it takes a lot of work in the vineyard to keep the canopies open, keep that disease pressure low, and manage those yields as much as we can. When you're looking there at an average yield of between sort of 15 to 17 tonnes a hectare, which sounds a lot, but when you take it back to it was kilos per vine, let's say, it's roughly about 3.5 to 4.5 kilos of vine. That area of the valley, Wairau Valley, does tend to crop heavier just because of those heavier soils and a lot of that vegetative growth. But we manage that through dropping fruit and really targeting those yields and keeping everything beautifully open. So the 2 pictures that we've got there at the bottom of the slide is one of the grower vineyards, and you can see just in the middle there's a small creek that's just running right through the middle of it. This photo was taken last year in 2021 when it was an exceptionally dry year, and you can just see how lush and green that is. And then you've got the fruit from the same vineyard as well. Again, as I mentioned, we're keeping that canopy beautifully open. We really want as much exposure on the fruit as possible to get those beautiful ripe characters coming through. And you can see there that the fruit is beautiful and golden come harvest time as well. So a lot of work in the vineyard there, but that's where about half of the fruit for the 2021 crowd it's giving a little bit of that weight. It's giving that beautiful acidity and line to the palate as well, but just creating that backbone there. So jump to the next part of the Wairau Valley. So this is a small township within the Wairau Valley called Renwick, and it makes up about 40% of the blend overall. And we have 4 long-term growers here in Renwick that we've been working with for the last 13 years now. We've been working with them, and they grow solely for us and nobody else. Incredibly engaged with what we do. And you can see the photo at the bottom there that was taken last year, and that's looking at all of the wines from their own blocks. So we have a tasting with them. It's not at a local retirement village. They're fantastic people. And yeah, they really get into it and get engaged. And they're also doing things like cover crops that you can see in the photo to the left as well. And that's really about bringing a bit of color into the vineyard, but also bringing in those beneficial insects and just to create a bit more of that biodiversity in the soil and in the environment as well. So this part of the valley, again, is actually the very stony, very alluvial, free draining area. Slightly lower yields, again at around about that sort of 3 to 3.5 kilos of vine, or about 15 tonnes a hectare. And then we're getting some good vine age in Marlborough now as well, around that 20 years old. And I think when we look back to sort of the mid 2000s with a lot of the Sauvignons that were coming out then, and there were those really punchy sort of fruit forward, which we do like, but with vine age now, we're starting to see some of those characters that might have, I guess, brought Sauvignon Blanc to a global stage just start to become a little bit more restrained, and with that vine age as well, and just seeing those yields start to come back too, which is a really good thing. So lower vigor in this area, earlier ripening, and generally it's my first block to be picked and come into the winery. Last piece for Crowded is our estate in the Southern Valleys, in the Waihopai Valley. So it's our estate vineyard, which is Sound of White, which a lot of the fruit actually goes into Catalina Sounds. Crowded House is the sister label to Catalina Sounds. We've got 32 hectares out there, mostly Sauvignon Blanc, but again, it's on those clay, wind blown, low soil. So again, with that, we get really good water retention. The yields come back again, even lower, 12 to 15 tonnes a hectare now, vine age of about 17 years old. And this part of the valley is often quite cooler and drier than definitely the Wairau and even the Awatere as well to a degree. So we tend to get smaller bunch sizes in there, a lot of canopy work to open things up and a lot of bunch exposure as well. So again, we're getting those beautiful ripe characters in there. And the photo to the left is just a photo at the top of our Pinot Noir block looking back down the valley towards those Richmond Ranges to where Havelock is in that photo there. So moving on to winemaking. Keeping things reasonably simple from a winemaking front. We're aiming to harvest either early morning, so starting around about 3 a.m. Or later in the evening. And that's really just to retain some of those punchy fruit characters and aromatics. If you harvest during the day when it's hot, you tend to lose those characters, and so that's what we're aiming to do there, just to retain that as much as possible. We're also fermenting quite low and slow for a long time, so low temperature through the peak of fermentation around about 12 degrees, and then slowly lifting it up. But it's generally can be a sort of 12 to even 20-day fermentation. So just really nice, long and slow. No sort of not trying to do too much to the wine throughout that time, and just retain all of that purity and that varietal typicity as much as possible. Really using selected yeasts, so not doing anything too funky with any wild ferments or any oak or the like. So it's all fermented 100% in stainless steel, and then just left for a very small amount of time on lees after fermentation, just prior to blending. We blend in May, June with the idea of getting things into bottle around June, July, and that's again just about capturing as much of that beautiful harmonious Marlborough fruit as much as possible. So machine picked, comes into the winery, goes into a press. It's just everything's pressed, and you can imagine the berries, they sort of pop a little bit like caviar. Once they're in the press, they release all of that beautiful juice, and then it's just lightly clarified and then goes into fermentation from there. Prior to going to bottle, it's just a light fining and filtration, and then into a container and on its way to you guys to enjoy from there. So next slide, please, Maddie. Covering off some of the key points. So we're crafting it in a classic style. It's fermented solely in stainless steel at cooler temperatures to retain all of the varietal freshness and vibrancy. We're really selecting everything in the vineyard. All the parcels are selected for Crowded House in mind, and really always reflecting that sense of place, that sense of Marlborough, and without any emphasis as such on any particular vineyard. Next one, please, Maddie. Something that I haven't touched on yet. All of the fruit that goes into Crowded House is from vineyards that are accredited with Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand. So SWINS is a globally recognised body, so it's an industry body for New Zealand that kind of regulates and tells us how much of what we have to do, and any changes around the world from a from a global perspective. There's a lot of shift in Europe at the moment around the chemicals that you can use, and shifting away from certain chemicals as well. So bringing that into an industry body, and really the aim is to leave the soil in a better condition and the land in a better condition from what we started with. And that's something that we're firm on, and we won't we won't stray away from that at all. So yeah, just going back to those, I guess, the climatic conditions, the distinct soil types between the Wairau Valley and the southern valleys as well, which play key parts in Crowded House for what we're doing. That key climate of Marlborough, being that low rainfall, we're protected in the north and the south by the two ranges, so that keeps rainfall low, disease pressure low. And during summer we get these fantastic northwesters that come through, really just keep the canopy nice and open and keep that disease pressure low as much as possible. Sorry, I think
I lost a slide here. You just bear with me. Do you want to get into the tasting?
Has everyone got a glass of the Sauvignon?
I can share that screen.
If you could, that would be right.
Is that okay? Can you see that?
So what we're looking at in the glass here, nice dry style of Sauvignon Blanc, fermented to dryness, that crisp acidity in there as well. It's got a lot of that mineral stone, it's got that freshly squeezed lime juice, the orange blossom, the wild mint and thyme in there as well. That palate with passion fruit, there's lemongrass, that crisp, vibrant minerality, which again is such a hallmark of Marlborough Sauvignon. Medium finish, relatively medium bodied, but I think can go with a range of foods. And so I had a look at your guys' menu and picked out a few things that I thought would go really well with the Sauvignon, and would be interested to hear some feedback from you guys on this as well. So the tiger prawns, garlic and the pastis butter with the aioli dip. I think you've got Sauvignon there, which is going to go well with the tiger prawns. It's going to cut through, you've got the acidity to cut through a bit of that, the aioli and the richness there as well. A traditional match for Sauvignon Blanc is always going to be the mussels. It's a great dish, again, creamy. You've got the acidity there that's going to cut through that as well. And then the other one was the chickpea and asparagus fritters, which I thought is just a nice, probably a slightly simpler version of something that's going to match well with the wine too. Maddie or Rupert, have you guys got anything that you'd like to add?
I've got a question on the 2022 vintage. How was that, Marlborough?
Yep. So 2020. So I guess let's go back and look at 21 as well. 21 last year was a really low yielding vintage. The region itself was about 30% down in yield, and that was because of the previous season. Well, coming into early into that season, we had poor flowering, so we had a poor fruit set, so we had really loose bunches with not as many berries, smaller bunches as well. And then this year we've been dealt slightly the other hand, where nobody was quite expecting it, but we had quite a wet season from the very start of sort of spring last year. So water tables and everything was really high. Plenty of water going into the season, even into summer as well. And so with COVID and labor issues, amongst everything else, people were sort of chasing their tails to actually get the work completed in the vineyard on time. January was fantastic, and then February came along and we had the tail end of a ex-tropical cyclone come through, which gave us dumped about 100 mil of rain, and that came straight through from the east, actually. So it came right up into the valley, dropped a lot of water, and it was right on for race on time as well. So there was quite a few nervous people out there in February this year, but then things cleared up, and we had a good month after that. And disease pressure was getting up there into March, but then we had a couple of really beautiful weeks and everything seemed to dry out fairly well. We had reasonably sort of average to above average yields this year as well. And then with labour issues in wineries, COVID, which we've sort of managed to stave off for the last couple of years, everything sort of compounded at once, and we had the peak of COVID at the peak of vintage. So we were losing vintage staff in the wineries, we were losing pickers in the field as well, and I found myself on the tools back in the winery for the first time in quite a long time, which was actually great to be able to do. But out of all the nervousness, I think, from 22 and the vintage and quality, I did my grading last week and exceptionally happy with the quality overall. I think the wine's going to be a little bit earlier drinking, I think, than the 20s and the 21s. They've got plenty of fruit weight there though, and probably just slightly lighter on alcohol. We're looking at about 12.5 to 13%. We would usually be looking around about 13 or 13.5. But again, it's just about showcasing. It's about showcasing the vintage and the season, and that's just something that we always have to contend with from a farming and agriculture perspective. But really looking forward to being able to getting the wine into bottle in a month's time, and then it'll be on its way to you guys in the UK. So even in the difficult vintages, there's always a few shining stars, and a few of the Crowded House components this year definitely have that shine, particularly the ones from Renwick. Looking absolutely fantastic.
I've had a few questions come in for you, Matt. If you just want to sort of bang out the answers quite quickly. Is the wine vegan friendly?
21 is not vegan friendly, no. But going forward, if that is something that I'm going to do with a lot of our wines. Catalina Sounds is vegan friendly. The entire range is going to be vegan friendly from now on, and Crowded House 22 will be vegan friendly.
And then beyond just touching base on something that was explored in a previous session with the team, was around the benefits of machine harvesting in terms of Crowded House. What does that process add to the wine?
For me, machine harvesting, you're getting it off the vine quickly. You do tend to pick up a little bit more phenolics from the skin, but it's actually not a bad thing in terms of texture. The best thing though is that you can get it into the winery quickly, and in a year like this that we've just had, where you needed to get things into the winery quickly, that helped an incredible amount. And we just don't have the labor to be able to go out and hand pick everything. So we do hand pick quite a lot of our Sound of White fruit for Sound of White and Catalina Sounds, and there are definitely differences that we've seen between machine harvesting and hand picking, but it's a lot quicker, it's cleaner, and it gets things into the winery quickly with little detriment, I think, to the fruit. The machine harvesters these days are incredibly good at what they do.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? As I can see, if you'll be tasting along, at least it's getting closer to 10 a.m. palatable time for Sauvignon Blanc.
There was a question, Maddie, about would we consider mentioning the sustainability accreditation on the label? Do we mention it on the back label, I think? Or I can't remember.
We don't have the logo on the back label, but that is definitely something we could look to squeeze in there.
Yep.
With the other bits and pieces.
That's a pretty easy one for us, I think. And if that's you know, would that be something for you and the team that you would find value in talking to customers?
Yeah, probably it's something that more and more customers are asking about, and also the vegan friendly element. If the 22 vintage and beyond is going to be vegan friendly, that's something worth putting on the bottle, because when you've got 60 wines on your list, we're trying to remember which ones are and aren't vegan friendly is really hard. But if it's on the label, that really helps.
Yeah.
No, I agree with Richard. I think certainly from the sustainability angle, more and more people are looking at that now, and just the logo helps considerably.
Yeah, okay, excellent. I have a question for you guys as well, actually, around alcohol and I guess the perception of alcohol in wines. And I was talking to somebody recently here who said they have a buyer in the UK for wine, and they're looking specifically for 11.5%. Is that just coming from a health side of things, people wanting to drink wines with slightly less alcohol, or is that something that, I don't know, is this something that you guys are saying?
Not that I'm hearing. To be fair, where the regions where most of our hotels are, it's the opposite. People want more alcohol. But that might be more of a specific demographic of places like Newcastle. No offense, Andy.
Cheers, Richard.
No, I agree again. I don't think the alcohol is an issue. There is a slight movement to lower alcohol wines, but these wines are not hitting like 15 and a half anyway. So I think it's irrelevant to this particular style of wine that we're talking about. But certainly, there are some, dare I say, big blockbuster New World wines and warmer climate wines in Europe that do hit 15 and a half. And some people, certainly the older generation, are a bit nervous about drinking those at lunchtime, particularly if they're driving. But I think as this wine currently is, it's perfect.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Yeah, it is just, it is a wine that a lot of people around the estate, when I'm traveling and talk to people about the wines they enjoy on the list, it's one of the ones that often comes up as someone says, I absolutely love the Crowded House Sauvignon. So it is a wine that gets a lot of good feedback from the team at Hotel de Van.
No, it's fantastic.
From your food recommendations as well there, Matt. For me, one of the world's perfect combinations is really simple, and that's just smoked salmon with Marlborough Sauvignon, because it's just absolutely amazing together. And I think this, with some good, dare I say, Scottish smoked salmon would be just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and another one that is very simple for me is actually, I have to say, fish and chips. And this is not something that I do often, but people have said to me, it's just that I think the saltiness, then you've got the fattiness of, the batter and everything else. And then you've got that Sauvignon that just kind of cuts through everything. And you've got this really nice freshness. But again, it's, I absolutely agree. The smoked salmon, any seafood really, and Sauvignon Blanc, nice little salsa verde on the side. Perfect.
And of course, the other thing is that it's just brilliant to drink on its own as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's it. You can have it on its own or with food. And, not every Sauvignon is made in that style as well. There's definitely those styles of Sauvignon out there that they require food to really have them. But with Crowded House in particular, it's one of those wines that you can have down at the beach, out on your back porch, whatever.
There's not many places in the UK where we're going to be able to drink Sauvignon on the beach, unfortunately.
Yeah,
we'll have to come over to New Zealand for that.
I'm thinking in my New Zealand head here.
But Matt, I'm going to have to wrap it up there time-wise. But from my perspective, I want to say a big thank you to you guys. Rupert, Madison, big thank you. It's a great session. If I can also just say that the next virtual tasting is next Thursday. So it's Thursday the 12th at 2 p.m. and that's with the team at Pikes in Australia, which is Riesling by the glass on the list. So please encourage your team to join us for the session next Thursday at 2 o'clock. But once again, from all us, big thank you to you guys for your time this morning.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Madison.
Richard. Thanks,
Thank
Nigel.
you.
And thanks
Have a great
everyone
day.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, good
Thank
evening
you.
and good night.